Well, we should have a really nice group tonight for this interesting forum. And so I want to welcome everyone who's joining us. Just to let you know that you all are muted when you first come on, but during the question and answer period, we're going to try to unmute you when you raise your hand, and I'll try to explain how that works. However, you can either you can either mute or not mute your picture. And we would welcome all of you to unmute your picture so that we can see you, but it's fine to leave yourself so we can't see you. That's fine too. So anyway, my name is Paul Shannon, and I'm here tonight with Michael Shimkin, along with our guest, of course, Emily Horowitz. Michael and I are volunteers with the Sex Offender Policy Reform Initiative, SOPRI. Both of us are also on the board of directors of NARSOL, the National Association for Rational Sexual Offense Laws. SOPRI, here in Massachusetts, is a Massachusetts group of volunteers of various backgrounds. Some are on the registry, most are not. Some are professionals, others are not, who advocate for policies that bring about successful reintegration of people convicted of sexual offenses. Successful reintegration with their communities, thereby increasing public safety, safeguarding civil liberties, and standing against public shaming caused by registries and by public ignorance and hatred. Unfortunately, we have a recent example of what being on the registry means. One of the men that the Boston Release Network has been working with finally got out of the treatment center. His relatives allowed him to live with them for a while. However, the neighbors put up such an uproar that he decided to spare his relatives the embarrassment and shame and publicity and moved out. He's now surf couching somewhere. He also got a job working with his brother, who's a contractor. They went out over to observe the job. The next day when they came back to actually start, he was met by the police and told never to come back again, having never started the job. So this is the typical type of situation that many people are going through. And it's a situation that SOPRI is trying to confront. The group really confronting it, of course, is the Boston Release Network, and we may hear from them a little bit later on. So we welcome to you. We would like to welcome you to join us in our network, trying to do this work. We know you're all busy with other things, of course, but this is an important issue to confront, even here in Massachusetts. Of course, these days, our network is a virtual network. So tonight, we're happy to welcome Dr. Emily Horowitz to present us her findings in a recently completed nationwide survey to better understand the diverse personal, demographic, and professional backgrounds of military veterans who have sex offense convictions. As we will see, this study is actually relevant to all registrants, as well as to all of us trying to do something about the sexual offense law regime. Unfortunately, Shawn Rolfe, whose background informs this study, is unable to be with us tonight. Something came up for him, so we'll be missing Shawn, which is a real shame. But Emily will fill us in about his experience and how it led to this study. Emily is a professor of sociology at St. Francis College in Brooklyn Heights, New York. She is founder and co-director of that college's post-prison program. Her research on the causes and consequences of fears and hysteria around sexual offense issues and inflammatory media coverage has played a pivotal role in the national movement working for more rational, evidence-based practices in dealing with those convicted of sexual crimes. Emily is author of the book, which is called Protecting Our Kids: How Sex Offender Laws Are Failing Us. It's published by Prager Books. Many of us have had a chance to look at this book, to read it, because it's been out for a number of years now, but it contains some of the very basic information about recidivism and attitudes. It's a very important book to read, so I would recommend this book. It's a relatively short book, but it's packed with all kinds of very, very important information, and we highly recommend it. So this is the third time that Emily has spoken for SOPRI. The first two times, of course, in person, and we're very glad to have her back on the screen here. So welcome, Emily, and welcome everybody. And we will begin the program. It's all yours, Emily. By the way, if you want to view this so that you just see Emily on the screen, then in the upper right-hand corner with your cursor, hit make sure you're in speaker view. Otherwise, we'll continue to see everyone here. Okay, Emily.
Just one quick thing.
Yes, Michael.
A lot of people have come on since you started talking. Maybe remind people that everybody's muted, and raising your hand is the way to get a question in, not chatting.
Yeah, so everyone is muted except for Emily, although she's muted right now too, but that'll change. And we will have a time for questions afterwards. We're going to try to use the raise hands function that I'll try to explain after Emily has spoken. But when you're not using the chat, there is a link in the chat tonight, however, about a new service for college, for people in college who have been released from prison, not just on sexual offense laws, but for anything. It has tremendous resources. If any of you know, or any of you are college students who are dealing with a conviction and you're trying to get into the scene there at a college, this will be a very invaluable resource. Bill Canavan from the Boston Release Network has provided it. So on your chat screen there, you will see a link to that study. Okay, Emily.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much, Paul and Michael and SOPRI, for inviting me. I always really enjoy talking to the people in person in Boston, but now I guess it's not just Boston, people from all over here. So thank you. I really appreciate your support of my work and inviting me. It means a lot to me. Anyway, so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about a survey that I am in the progress of writing up. It's a survey of veterans who have sex offense convictions. So I think it seems like a very highly specific topic, but one of the reasons why I wanted to study this topic, when I wrote my book, I interviewed many people who have sex offense convictions, and I was surprised at how many of them had served in the US military. And I was partly surprised because I think I naively thought that like maybe if you were a veteran, you would be treated better by the criminal justice system, or maybe you wouldn't like have to be on the registry, or you wouldn't be subject to such harsh punishment, or you'd be treated with more understanding. So I was really confused why so many people who served in the military were winding up with lifetime registration. In addition, I think my general perspective on people who are convicted of sex offenses is that I think they're not that different than people who commit other crimes. I think there's a few reasons why people become involved with the justice system. And I'll talk a little bit more about why people become involved with the criminal justice system. But I think one of the problems with the registry and sex offense laws in general is that they're treated completely differently. People say people who commit crimes are in this category, but people who commit sex offenses are in a completely different category. They have different motivations, they're more dangerous, and they require special post-punishment, post-conviction, post-prison laws, such as the registry, such as residency restrictions, such as community notification, because they're so different. So my general project is to highlight how people who wind up on the registry aren't really that different than anybody who becomes involved with the criminal justice system. In other words, anybody who's just a human being. Human beings make mistakes. Some people make mistakes and they wind up in the criminal justice system. And I think you see in society, there's more and more understanding that people who commit crimes deserve second chances. And I'm really concerned about people who commit crimes and are convicted of crimes or convicted of sex offenses and are viewed differently and are viewed like that group doesn't deserve a second chance. You saw like in Florida, they restored the right to vote to everybody except a few groups, and one of those groups are people with sex offense convictions. And you see this over and over. People with sex offenses are carved out and treated differently. So my interest in this is not necessarily so much on like how being a veteran makes you more likely to wind up on the registry, but how people who wind up on the registry are the same as everybody else, and they aren't particularly pathological, particularly dangerous. They're not that different than anybody else. And I thought veterans were a really interesting category because in our culture, we do view veterans with a lot of respect, or we theoretically do, right? These are people who, most of them were not drafted, although there's people in my survey who were drafted into Vietnam. But most people, they enlist, they want to serve our country. And from our research, it looks like not many of them, but there are those who go and serve our country and then come back and get involved with the criminal justice system because of the experiences that they had there. There are veterans courts and there's veteran pods in some prisons. In some ways, the criminal justice system treats those who completed military service a little bit better with some advantages. One person we interviewed was in a veterans pod and they were treated differently within the prisons. But our surveys was looking, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So I really wanted to see, who are veterans that wind up on the sex offense registry, and is one of our hypotheses. I did this with Shawn Rolfe, who, as you mentioned earlier, can't join us. Shawn is a military vet who is on the registry, and he's also, he just got his PhD in criminal justice, and he'll be a really important voice for registrants moving forward in his career. He just got his PhD, and so he's been helping me with this study. We've been doing it together. But anyway, so I said, I started off by saying my research, as somebody who's met many people convicted of sex offenses, is I'm convinced that sexual offending is not something that should be separated from any other type of crimes. It's the same causal factors. So the way to stop sex offenses is not to, or in the way to address this problem is to engage in prevention and addressing the causes of all types of crimes. So I'm gonna put off with what our findings are until the end, but so I'm not doing this research to say that those with military backgrounds who get involved with, who get convicted of sex offenses should have special treatment. I think that everybody who gets convicted of a sex offense should be treated fairly and not subject to draconian permanent punishment. Okay, so let me start with saying that there's a lot of literature that shows that military service can be an impetus for criminal justice involvement. Is there anybody on here that's a veteran? Can you do the hand raising? Okay, maybe not. All right. Anyway, there's a lot of research that shows that military service can lead to criminal justice involvement, namely PTSD and stress, exposure, and then subsequent drug and alcohol abuse, and other traumas and experiences that one experiences in the military. There's not much research on veterans who are convicted of sex crimes. So we did a survey. This was, I think, one of the first surveys ever done on this population. We reached out to many groups like SOPRI, NARSOL, other sex offense advocacy organizations, and tried to get people who had sex offenses to answer our survey. It was a 100-question survey, a lot of demographic information, but also we asked in-depth questions about how their military service led to their sex offense. So our survey, which I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight, we had about 300 respondents, and we're in the process of writing up our findings. And I hope tonight, after I share some of our preliminary findings, those of you on the call can give me some feedback and offer some insight into how we could present a paper and a study that answers questions and leads to some good policy possibilities. So our survey, not surprisingly, most of the people who responded, they ranged in age from 26 to 83. It's not surprising that our youngest was 26 because all the people that we surveyed, all nearly 300 people, were people who had served in the military and then had been convicted of a sex offense either during or after their military service. So our oldest respondent was 83 and he is still on the registry. I say he because every respondent was male. Okay, and the average age of the respondents was about 55. Most of our respondents were white, over 90% were white, some Latinos, very few African Americans, and that's probably a result of the populations that are involved with advocacy, and people who know other people who are involved in advocacy. Almost everybody was a US citizen. We had respondents from 41 states. One interesting finding was that over half of our respondents were unmarried, and we speculate part of that is the stress of being on the registry and the stigma of having a sex offense could lead to, being unmarried. 67% were divorced at least once. Almost half had a college degree or higher, which is, higher than the general population. But those who are unemployed or living off VA benefits were overrepresented. 11% were unemployed. About 20% were living off of VA benefits or Social Security. Only a quarter were employed full-time. Again, that is probably a result of the stigma and difficulties with sex offense registration. About 30% lived alone, and the population was only about 18% lived with children, and we're not sure why. That's much less than the average population if you control for age. It was interesting because we asked when people served. The majority were in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we had respondents who'd served in Korea and more in Vietnam. About a third had a service-connected disability. Otherwise, they were, they look like most people on the registry, except this population, the respondents, as I said earlier, they are whiter than the most people on the registry. The registry is more diverse than the population that we surveyed. Almost everybody, 92% of respondents were on the public registry. One of our hypotheses, or what we were hoping to find, is that maybe within the criminal justice system, veterans were treated better, but a number of respondents said that during sentencing, judges and prosecutors said, you were in the military, you should have known better, you shouldn't have engaged in this activity. So it actually, there's some evidence that being in the military could enhance your sentence in some way. It wasn't like, oh, you were in the military, you served our country, maybe you don't have to be on the public registry. It didn't seem to have any effect. Interestingly, only 5% of respondents had a stranger victim, which is even lower than the entire registry population. A quarter of our respondents had a victim who was 16 or older. I'm going to talk mostly about, I'm just giving you this demographic information to kind of understand who served, who answered these questions. And I know it might not seem that interesting, but it's really important in terms of how we interpret our results. So this is where I'm going to really talk about our findings and hopefully what will be interesting. I'd like to share my screen here. Let me just share my screen. I'm going to share a table with you. One of the questions we asked, and obviously what we're trying to find out, is how did being in the military have an impact on the crime, have an impact on the incident that led to them being on the registry. So I'm going to share my screen and, okay, here, all right. Can you see this table here? Okay, all right. So we asked respondents, like in their own view, and obviously this is self-reported, and I understand all the problems with asking people like, you know, these questions and not looking at their criminal history, but we asked people like, you know, how did your military service influence your sexual offense conviction? And as you can see, stress and PTSD was the largest category. Many of them reported having very stressful and traumatic experiences while in the military. Many of them talked about military culture, which I'll show you the collapse categories in a minute, but it was very interesting because many of them talked about being exposed. Again, this is self-report, but they said they were exposed to pornography in like very extensive ways in the military. We know that like in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were single-sex units and very limited ability to leave bases. So there was a lot of pornography and exposure to pornography. Others talked a lot about being exposed to prostitution in strip clubs and the experience of being in the US military abroad and having a lot of opportunities to engage in prostitutions and visit strip clubs. Many of the respondents who were in the Navy would talk about ships landing and how they'd be greeted by sex workers. And so they viewed this as maybe leading to them committing an offense either during or after being in the military. Most of the people, and this is really important, when they enlisted or were drafted in the military, they were 18, 19, 20. So they were very young, and these are their first sexual experiences. And being in the context of the military, this was how they first were exposed to sex, pornography, strip clubs. And many of them, we didn't use this word, but a lot of them said being in places that had like different ages of consent created problems for them when they returned stateside. A few reported having really bad experiences in the don't ask, don't tell realities of the military and being bullied and hazed, and that led to other kinds of trauma. So that kind of trauma is not directly related to the stress and PTSD of like seeing combat, but it's another kind of stress. And there's been a lot of studies on the hazing culture of the military and how that can do a lot of psychological and emotional damage. And then of course, like we see with all justice involved populations, many report that abusing drugs and alcohol led to their offense. You know, it had an impact on their behavior and their decision making. And even though I don't put this here, we're not really sure what to do with this population, but I know SOPRI's done a lot on this. Many people said, you know, I didn't even commit a crime. It was a cop posing as a minor, or, you know, this girl lied about her age, or they were falsely accused. So some, like, they're not in these categories because they reported that no crime had occurred. Okay, I'm going to show a second chart now. So if you collapse those categories, you know, so if you look at PTSD and stress, which are like mental health, many reported committing their crime after going through a period of depression after ending military service. So that's under PTSD, stress, mental health issues. The second category is military culture and trauma, PTSD. That's the largest group. That's the largest category. And then drugs and alcohol. And if you look at these are sort of the three things that lead to any types of crime. If you look at assault, if you look at, you know, any kind of non-sexual offense, any justice-involved population, any population in jails and prisons, these are the three causes of becoming justice-involved, right? Mental health challenges, past trauma, you know, experience, and also drug and alcohol abuse or use. So I think as I started, I want to make clear this is really the most important chart, and this is what we really want to emphasize in our paper. It's really important not to put sexual offending in a different category. The registry and all of these policies that are related to the registry and lifetime punishment and stigmatization are based on this idea that people who commit sex offenses are different psychologically, they're different in many, many ways than other people who commit crimes or other people who make mistakes or have problems in their lives. And the pathologizing and creating out the special category justifies the registry and justifies all of these policies. So really the goal of our study is to highlight how this population, which should be viewed favorably, right? They served our country, as I said at the beginning. The majority were not drafted, they enlisted, are also being caught up in these, this sex offense legal regime, as Paul said at the beginning. I also think it's really important to note that we had room for people to comment and write things at the end of the study, and almost all of the respondents, almost all of the close to 300 respondents said, you know, I've considered suicide, my life is destroyed, I ruined my life. You know, they all expressed, not all, but the majority expressed how much the registry and these laws were ruining their lives. And I hope that we can also highlight that in our paper, the destructiveness of these laws. I'm going to stop the share, but we actually asked people what percentage, if we'd asked people if they'd ever thought about suicide, and I think other studies on registering. So there's 63% of respondents said they'd had suicidal thoughts, and 45% said they'd had suicidal thoughts strictly because of the registry. and a quarter, which is a really large amount, a quarter of this population said they'd attempted suicide. And almost 3/4 of those who'd attempted suicide said it was strictly because of the experience on the registry. Okay, and then I'm just gonna show you one more slide, and then I would love to open this up to a conversation or answer any questions about our study and our research and the hypotheses underlying this effort. I'm just going to open up one more. Okay, hold on here. Okay, I'm going to do screen share one more time. Hold on, sorry. How do I? Oh, share screen. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So, do you see this slide? So this was interesting. If you're interested in, of the respondents, what they reported placed them on the registry. So this is a word cloud. So the biggest words show the most common frequency. So you see there's a lot of veterans who have convictions for child pornography, cases involving minors, rape, sexual assault. And these are their own words. So these aren't, you know, from criminal histories, but I think it shows there's of our 300 respondents, there's a lot of variety in the types of crimes that they were convicted of, but we did see a lot of computer crimes. Many said, oh, I was just looking at porn compulsively as a result of my depression, and it led me down a path to looking at indecent pictures of minors. Many of those who had child pornography convictions at least reported that it was accidental, that they had been just compulsively looking at pornography, and many attributed it to the trauma they experienced in the military and depression and drug and alcohol use, and they didn't view it as part of like a pre-existing pathology. It was accidental. Okay. All right, so I would love to answer any questions you have. I hope that wasn't too much information bombarded at you. Like I said, this is a work in progress and we're just still analyzing our results, but I would love to answer any questions or talk further about our study or why the registry is a terrible policy.
Okay, well, thank you, Emily. Let's see now. In terms of raising your hands, Michael, you want to tell people how to do that?
They're already doing it. Damien Ganesh has a question, and so does Joseph W.
Okay, well, so let's start with Damien. Let me see if I can unmute you.
I can do it. I'm going to ask. There we go.
Okay.
Damien,
We're having problems with...
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We're having trouble with the sound, Damien. Hold on a second.
Let's come back to Damien.
We'll come back to you, Damien, once we can try to figure that out. Could we have
Joseph W.
Joseph W?
He comes on.
There we go. Okay, now it's on. Okay,
There you go.
so I guess two questions that come to mind. First, did you or your study ever consider looking at purely the criminal justice side in the military and seeing the percentage or the statistics on how many of those crimes that were brought to court or brought to a conviction were sexual in nature? And then my second one, yeah, you can go to that one first.
Yeah, Shawn could answer that. We didn't ask people, you mean sex crime convictions in the context of like the military that weren't on the public registry or in the state or federal criminal justice system?
No, I mean, sure, they're all going to go to the registry because that's under federal law. But I'm saying just looking at the veteran side, I guess this would really be those who are either still in the military or shortly retired out of the military and then brought back into the military just to be convicted. Did you look at the percentage of those crimes at all?
No, but that's a really good question, and I'll bring that up with Shawn. He would know more about that. Most of the people were either convicted after discharge or they were expelled as a result of their conviction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second one, your data, when it's finally published and ready to be written up, do you have any sort of avenues or places you published on that sort of open data access for others to look at and actually analyze?
You mean the data set?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I think we'd absolutely share the raw data with anybody who wanted it, and we'd probably publish it hopefully in a peer-reviewed sociological or criminal justice journal. But,
okay.
Yeah, so definitely I've shared survey data in the past with anybody who's emailed me, so.
Oh, cool. Easy day. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we can get in touch with Emily.
I'm easy to find.
Great, and so thank you, Joseph. Damien, let's try you again. Let's see if we can get the sound better. Give it a try.
Can you hear me?
No.
Hello?
Okay. I'm gonna mute Damien. Jason is on right now. He wants to give it a shot.
I'm on?
Yep. Jason,
All right.
you're there.
All right. Hi, Dr. Horowitz.
Hi, how are you?
Quick question. So my question is, did you ask how many people actually sought help for mental health help or for problem sexual behavior and were turned away? I mean, I've heard stories of people saying that they were just told to suck it up and then they went on to offend. So I'm just curious if that was part of the study.
No, we didn't ask people if they'd sought help prior to their conviction, but many responded that they'd sought help from the VA for depression and other mental health challenges, PTSD, and they didn't receive sufficient care. And so they attributed their subsequent offense to not getting appropriate care from the VA. But I mean, I think, as I said in the beginning, I feel like I'm not that interested in like pre-existing pathologies. I feel like there's a lot of work on that. And so we didn't ask like, you know, when you entered the military, if you had these issues, did you get help? Because also, yes, so that wouldn't be kind of consistent with my perspective on this issue or this study.
Okay. Thank you.
But I would add, a lot of people self-reported issues with porn, you know, terms like porn addiction, exposure to porn. And it's very interesting for whatever reason that so many, at least the veterans, viewed their experience with pornography while in the military leading to their conviction. And I was surprised at that finding that I don't know if it's because, as I said earlier, some reported they were in, you know, single sex, very isolated environments. And so maybe they were using pornography more. It was the first time they had exposure to it, but it almost seemed like a collective thing, like others shared porn, or it was a culture where pornography was distributed and discussed, and they feel that this is what led to their subsequent offending. So I wasn't that familiar with that. And Shawn and I have to kind of work that through more and do some follow-ups.
So Thomas is up next. Thomas, if you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. First of all, I want to say, Emily, very impressed with the study. But my question is it sort of parlays with Joseph's question. I was actually convicted in the military, Article 125, sodomy with a minor, Article 134, indecent acts. I was given a bad conduct discharge, and I served my sentence through the military. And then, of course, when I was on parole, I was with the feds. Have you looked at maybe talking to people that have been convicted within the military system itself? Or is that something you're hopefully going to expand on? Because there is a lot of people that have been court-martialed that are going through the same thing. And I was convicted after I had gotten back from in support of Desert Storm and Desert Shield. So I was just curious how, if you're looking at that, or if that's something that would interest you in the study.
Yeah, definitely something that would interest me. I think, we had to get like approval for our study and for all of our questions. And so we were trying to make it as directed as possible, because it's when you ask people questions about crimes they've committed and sex, there's a lot of hoops to go through. We had to get institutional approval. And I wonder if we might need the VA's cooperation to ask people.
Well, see, I'm not part of the VA because my crime actually happened during my first enlistment. So unfortunately, I'm not entitled to benefits. I really don't consider myself a veteran because I feel like I've disgraced, my country and disgraced myself. But mine happened almost 30 years ago. And I'm still feeling the stigma behind it, because here in Texas, they're really, they take it very seriously here, just like in Florida and California. And I've just, it's been a struggle, but I've been doing good with myself, haven't reoffended or anything like that, lived a really good life, got married, bought my own house and everything like that. So I'm pretty successful. But I would just be curious to see what you get out of like members that have been court-martialed and in that route, because I've talked to a lot of people and there's a lot of stress involved, also a lot of alcoholism. Mine made it worse because mine was male on male. And at that time when I was convicted, there was no don't ask, don't tell. It was, they barge in your room, they take pictures of you in compromising positions. And so I just think it'd be fascinating on top of what you've already done. And I'm really impressed, like I said, with your study.
Oh, great. That sounds really interesting. And I'm going to share that with Shawn, and maybe if you email me, we could, and Jason as well, we could talk.
Yeah, I would love to. I would definitely love to. And any information I can provide. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very promising phenomenon to study. To find out just how many are actually court-martialed for sexual offenses while they're in the military, and the impact that has, what that experience is like. Thomas, does it mean, Thomas, that did they immediately kick you out of the military, or do you remain in it in some way?
Hold on a second. He got muted, so give him a second.
Wait a second. I'm sorry, Thomas.
Okay, there we go. So what happened in my case, just like everybody else, is that once you're convicted in a court-martial, you go to Fort Leavenworth, or you go to Leavenworth just opened up a new regional confinement facility, or you'll go to a regional confinement facility like Charleston or Kirtland Air Force Base. But I was transferred to Fort Leavenworth. I did 4 years. My sentence was 12 years, and I got a bad conduct discharge. At 4 years, I was paroled. And then when I was paroled under the federal system. And what happens is that once you get your DD-214, you've been discharged after your normal time, then the military will transfer you to the feds, and you finish out the rest of your sentence in the federal system.
Thank you.
So Kathy Williams, I think, is up next. Kathy?
Emily, thank you for this. I in my jobs have spent literally thousands of hours talking to sex offenders, and many of them are veterans. And I think that everything that you're identified here is right on the money. I think it really describes exactly what their trauma is. There's, you know, one thing that I find that comes up over and over again, and I wondered what you think of this. It always, and I mean, what I'm saying is very anecdotal, just what I have heard. But there's a lot of, you know, there's two categories that of veterans that I've dealt with. One are mostly younger ones who enter the military pretty dysfunctional. And often their parents push them into it. They're trying to get them straightened out. You know, well, the military knows how to straighten you out. Well, they really don't. And often their time in the military is very limited, is somewhat traumatic, certainly, and not at all a positive experience. And, you know, they were drug and alcohol users before, even more so in the military. And they are discharged at an early age in a, you know, after a short period of time. You know, the second category is more functional people, and they tend to be older people who, for example, Vietnam War veterans who were drafted. And, you know, they may have had fairly functional lives pre-military, but, you know, they have told me, particularly the Vietnam era veterans, true horror stories, worse than any offending I've ever heard, that involves, you know, killing, you know, kill or be killed kind of situations. I mean, just incredibly, incredibly, the world's most stressful and horrible things. And I suspect that's true in most wars. I mean, a lot of veterans don't like to talk about these things, but they have talked to me about them. And you know, I see a difference in these two kinds of veterans. You know, the result is often the same. I mean, they end up sexually offending. And I think it is as a result of trauma, as a result of drug and alcohol. You know, all of the things that you mentioned are, you know, spot on, the things that I think, and I'm sure culture, you know, is something that you know, leads to it as well. But, you know, did you in your study ever noticed anything about age differences in those, what I've described as two categories?
We actually haven't like disaggregated our findings by age yet, but I think we'd like to do that and also try to, right, so we would look at Iraq and Afghanistan versus Vietnam and earlier. Obviously our sample is skewed towards Iraq, Afghanistan, and more recent deployments, but there's a lot of research on how military service leads to justice involvement. And I think the hope of our study is to show justice involvement involving sex offenses or justice involvement involving any other type of crime is not that different. They're motivated by the same kinds of trauma or military culture or drug and alcohol use. And as I said in the beginning, like, it's not necessarily that we want to show that those who were in the military deserve special treatment or special sympathies or should be excluded from the registry, but that sex offenses are no different than any other kind of offense or mistake. And I just really want to emphasize that. And our hope is that, you know, there is some hope that people are more sympathetic to veterans, even though our study suggests that, at least in the criminal justice system, judges are not, and that they might say, you know, you were a veteran, you should know better. And that we heard over and over, which was surprising.
So people who have asked questions, I hope you don't feel like I'm cutting you off. We have quite a few others that want to ask questions. So Kathy, I need to move on. David LaRue, you're on.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me all right, Emily?
We can.
All right. I just wanted to bring up that obviously one of the struggles that veterans, especially most recently, but has really gone on probably through all time, is veterans coming back and dealing with suicide issues.
So when you mentioned that among the categories of looking at the veterans in this most recent study, having attempted suicide was one of the categories. And I think that's probably more common than a lot of people think of. But you know, that's actually common almost from the moment of arrest for people with sexual offenses. Suicide has an exceptionally high risk. As soon as someone's been accused, even if they're out on bail, you see a lot of suicide. You see suicides during trial and immediately following trial. But in most cases, I guess what we often, within at least your study, was you only saw the suicide attempts, because if in fact they were successful, they weren't around to be a part of your study. So,
Right. That's
so,
true. True. Yes.
I do thank you for what you're doing in your research. I believe this is the second study that I've participated in, so I'm anxious to see the results.
The second study on being a veteran and on the registry, or just the second study about the registry?
Whoops. Give him a second. I am muted. I'm muted. Sorry about that. Give him a second.
No, what I was asking was, this isn't the very first study that you've done in the sexual offending.
Right. Oh, okay. Yes.
So I've been a participant in one of your earlier studies a few years back.
Thank you.
So,
thank you so much.
So
I
thank you for the research is what I wanted to say.
I'm always struck by how amazing it is that so many people answer surveys and respond in such honest and detailed ways. I mean, I can't share the raw answers from this survey, but it's amazing. Some people wrote like 3 or 4 paragraphs, and it's a 100-question survey, and I really appreciate it because I think the way to understand the damage and destruction of the registry is to really highlight the experiences of those on it, but we have to collect data, so thank you.
Right. Many of the people who respond to surveys, it's because we are advocates in positions all over the country. So when those requests go out, we're some of the first ones to see those requests. So we're already out there, so we're willing to participate. So I think you see that more often. I'm sure some others here on the call probably have been in your surveys too. Yes.
Oh, good.
So
Thank you again.
Ann Conlon-Smith.
Hi, my comment is for Thomas, and I hope Thomas is still on, because I really appreciated his honesty and his vulnerability. But I want to say there's a lot of things that have disgraced this country, and it doesn't sound like he's one of them. So I'd like him to reconsider that.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, very simple. I just have a quick follow-up question, because you're kind of looking at that data, perhaps maybe as an interest to also explore. Have you been in contact or worked at all with the Save Our Heroes project or their group?
No, what is that?
So they specifically focus only on current veterans or those who were brought back into military service just to be brought to a court-martial. And they explicitly focus on those who are falsely accused. And so they tend to be very heavy on the data, very on the advocacy, trying to make sort of positive changes, especially with the last 2 or 3 administrations, making such a heavy hand towards trying to punish military members specifically. So now when you get convicted for something, you're explicitly given the lowest discharge possible, 0 VA benefits, put straight onto the registry, no questions asked. So they are very much putting all the eggs into the basket against military members at this point. Oh, and a little minor detail as well, taking away the ability to really apply for, clemency. So that used to be in the past, a judge, based on the circumstances of your case, could grant clemency. They've actually taken away that authority as well. So they're really trying to make it, from Congress's viewpoint, the heaviest hit possible to be on sex offenses.
Oh, wow. I was surprised that, and maybe you know this, that there are people who have sex offense convictions who still get VA benefits, but I guess what you're saying is if they are dealt with in a military court, they wouldn't be eligible for that.
So let's try one more time to go back to Damien.
Hello, can you hear me?
Trying my best.
Can you hear me?
You know what, Damien? I'm gonna open you up to a chat. So why don't you submit your question on a chat, and we'll share it with everybody else. Let's see if I can get that. Paul, other than that, I don't see anybody else with their hand up at the moment. I asked Damien to submit something on the chat so I can relay it to you. I feel bad about that.
To answer your question, though, yes. If it's in the military, then it's automatic as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Emily.
Yeah.
This is Thomas.
Yes.
First of all, I wanted to, the lady that said that, I really appreciate that. My uncle gets on my case also because he's also a veteran. And I just, you know, it's a really touchy subject for me and stuff like that. But the other question I had for you real quick was your contact information so I can send you an email. How do I get a hold of
you? Paul, can I put it in the chat? I'll put it in the chat, or you can
Michael, can we put that in the chat somehow?
Yes, give me a second.
Or you can just put it.
Either that, you could just say it, and Thomas could write it down.
I gotta go.
I've got my phone right here. I'm waiting for the email, and I can send you a quick hi email.
You want to just put your email out there, Emily? Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, I can just put my email on the chat, or you can just put.
Okay.
You know what? I'll text you my email, Paul.
I got it right here. Give me a second, and I'll put it out there. But we do have a question from Damien. Thank you. He put it on the chat. It says,
you can go ahead and mute. Go ahead and mute me.
I'm going to mute you there, Thomas. So this is from Damien, who was the first person out there, and I feel sorry about that, Damien. How come veterans courts exclude veterans with sex crimes? There is redemption for all other veterans that commit crimes except for sex crimes, which, from my understanding, veterans courts is for veterans who has never been in trouble that later on do get in trouble, is to shine the light for a second chance at life. So how come veterans courts exclude veterans with sex crimes? Maybe that's the question.
Well, I think veterans courts exclude sex crimes, but they also exclude a number of other crimes, a number of violent offenses. And veterans courts aren't all over. There are not very many of them, and they're very specialized, just like drug courts or other specialized courts. There's a very narrow, there's not very many, there's very stringent rules about like the nature of your case. And yes, sex crimes are excluded from all veterans courts as far as I know. Although I think in prisons where they have veterans pods, which is a special place in the prison where veterans are housed. I know they have one in Washington State and a few other places. If you have a sex offense conviction, you're not excluded from those. But yeah, veterans courts do not allow veterans courts that are not in the military. So those are courts, state courts that are federal courts as well. I think that
everybody who's on the chat, Emily's email address is now in the chat.
Yeah, but I would agree that gets to the larger premise of my work in general, which is that those who commit sex offenses are carved out and excluded in all types of ways, in all types of efforts at reform and treatment. So that's just another example of why it's really important to, at least I view this study, at least is important to show that the causes of sexual offending are the same as causes of all types of offending. They're not particular. And once you say they're particular, that's when you get carved out and they say, well, you committed a sex offense, you're like a whole nother ballgame. You need to be, you're the worst of the worst.
So we have one more question here from Steve. I'm gonna unmute you, Steve.
Hi, Emily, can you hear me?
I can.
Hey, first of all, I want to thank you for all your research you do, and I appreciate your hard work. I do have a question. You had mentioned in this survey, which I think I took probably, one of the questions was your offense against someone under the age of 16? And I'm wondering why you chose the age 16 and not 18, as most states consider under 18 still a minor, or at least mine does. I'm just wondering, because I know you do a lot of research, why you chose the age 16.
So we had 3 categories. We said victim under 12, victim 12 to 15, victim 16 and older. And the reason we chose 16 and older was not necessarily because of like state to state age of consent laws, but because a sexual offense involving a 16-year-old or older is a different substantive, it's substantively different than those who are considered children. So under 12, some would view that as being minor attracted. 12 to 15, there's different views on that, but 16 or older is agreed on in the research that that's an adult. That's not in like the DSM as being minor attracted or attracted to children or involving a child. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, we could have asked, was your victim of the age of consent in your state? But
Hey, I was curious. I understand you're coming from a treatment perspective.
Paul, another hands up at the moment. It's 8:05
Okay.
Eastern time.
So let's make sure that Thomas has Emily's email. Okay, he's got that.
Everybody's gotten it.
And we'll be opening actually up the chat to everyone in a minute for those who would like to kind of participate in the network, just to be kept aware of what's going on in Massachusetts along these lines. Sometimes there's really horrendous legislation that gets proposed in addition to what's already there. And we're trying to get people to just kind of be part of this network, that we can stay in touch with each other about these matters, and especially if there are times when we can do something about it. The Boston Release Network, of course, is very active, needs help, and the 2 Bills, Billy Stevens and Bill Canavan, are doing all kinds of great work there. Michael is on the board of that Boston Release Network, and some of you may be interested in that, in which case Michael is going to open up the chat that all of you could add your email address, your name and email, if you would like to kind of get connected to some of this stuff. For those who don't, that's fine. We appreciate you coming on tonight. I wonder, just to close off the questioning, Emily, I'd like to ask you a question.
sure.
And based on these 300, which seems like a tremendous amount of interviews, what are the main problems that people are having now living with this conviction and with the implications in terms of registries or whatever?
Well, we actually didn't ask them that specific question, but the ones who shared the problems they're facing now, it sounded like depression, unemployment, estrangement from family members were the top kind of 3 problems that people reported, which is consistent with other people, you know, anybody who's dealing with the registry. And I think from the demographic data I discussed earlier, having such a small percentage that are employed full-time or living with children. I mean, living with children kind of is a marker for normalcy in some way, right? So few lived with their own children or children in general, partners' children.
Yeah.
It suggests, you know, a more difficult, unstable life. If you look at,
Right.
So there is just one more quickie that's come in. Kathy and John have one last one there. You want to try that? Sorry.
Okay. Emily, I'm just wondering about Shawn, your co-researcher. I think it's a tremendous accomplishment that he has gotten a PhD. It's an accomplishment for anyone. And if he's on the registry, I imagine it's even that more difficult. But I'm wondering at this point now, what are his prospects in the future, like to go ahead in his career? Or does he have a job lined up? Could he ever become a professor? What does, you know, that?
He probably would have a lot of challenges getting employed on a college campus. And he'd be a really good person to speak to SOPRI about his experiences and the challenges he's faced. But I know he's looking for work as a researcher that is not involving teaching students, because there's issues with Title IX, and if you're on the registry, I will say I run a program, for instance, for formerly incarcerated men and women, but our administration will not let me accept anybody who has a sexual offense into the program. I had to fight to, originally they said only people with nonviolent convictions, and so I won the fight to have people who have different types of convictions, but not people who've sexually offended. And that's a shame. And people who have sexual offenses face a lot of challenges earning a college degree. They're often told, you know, you can pay the tuition and earn a degree online, but you're not allowed to be on campus, and things like that. So Shawn will have a challenge, but he's super motivated and he's very outspoken, and he's starting to be more frank about his story. So I think that'll help him. I will say there is a field, it's called convict criminology, and it's people who get PhDs in criminology who've been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. But again, most of those that I know of don't have sexual offense convictions. So, as I think you all know, my work is to kind of bring people who have sexual offense convictions into the world of criminal justice reform and redemption.
So Thomas, you got a quickie one here? Okay. Thomas,
Yeah,
has got a quick one.
a real quick question. First of all, Emily, I sent you an email with my contact information. And the second thing I just wanted to put out there, if anybody needs help with job assistance, I'd be a good person to probably help them. I actually work for a major airline. So I have access to the, tarmac. And so I can tell you how I did it, just, by being honest, and just, they look at the time, they don't look at how, but if anybody needs help, just real quickly, I sent you my contact information, and I can reach out to them and try to help them out.
Thank you. That's all we've got, Paul.
Okay. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us this evening for this interesting conversation. I think some new doors have been opened for future research, and we all look forward to seeing the final form that Emily's research is going to take. And we all look forward to staying in touch with Emily as she continues her important work in this insane culture that we live in terms of the level of ostracism that it imposes on particular groups of people. And the question is, can such a culture that does that ever really be sane and really ever be able to become what it can become, the type of place where human beings can enjoy each other. So would invite all of you to stay connected with us. Emily, you don't have to have a long trip home tonight. And thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all very much. Good night.
So, Michael, you want to stop the recording
I'm
there?
gonna do that right now. Yep.
Great.